Hello everybody. So this is the first opening session, and leading on from Richard, we are going to be debating what Labour has to do to win the next general election. So I have got an esteemed panel with me. I have Diane Abbott, who is Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, has been a Member of Parliament for Hackney since 1987, and she is also Britain's first elected female Black Member of Parliament, which is some achievement. We have Peter Kyle, who has been a Member of Parliament for Hove and Portslade since 2015. And big congratulations, Peter. He received the biggest swing to Labour in the last general election. And we have the fantastic Caroline Flint, Member of Parliament for Don Valley. And Caroline has got a huge range of experience, having served in the last Labour government, Minister for Europe, Housing, Employment, Health. She has seen it all, basically. Big round of applause for Caroline. And last but not least, we have another Peter, because it's always good to have two Peters on a panel. I think it's very important. Is a former president of polling company YouGov. He's also been a journalist for several publications, and he pops up all the time on things like Newsnight as a...
Not as often as you.
That's true. I don't want you taking my work from me, Peter. Let's discuss this later. My agent will be in touch. Big round of applause for Peter Kellner. So, as Richard said, the election had, we did not win, but there was lots of good things that we need to acknowledge. We did not get wiped out, which we were worried about. I will hold my hands up. I think lots of people underestimated Jeremy Corbyn and massively overestimated Theresa May. It's very interesting that just 8 weeks ago, when the snap election was called, Jeremy was 24 points behind in the poll and kicked things off with a photo call in a toilet. 8 weeks later, it's Theresa May who's in the doo-doo, which is quite something. And Jeremy did fight a very energetic, interesting campaign. He energised the youth. He was like a surprise hit. He was like the equivalent of a political fidget spinner, whereas Theresa May was the equivalent of Windows XP. Weak, under threat, and not supported by anybody, so it seems. And it shows you, politics is really interesting at the moment. There's lots of good things that Labour can offer, but of course, second place isn't good enough. We want to win. The other thing, of course, which is very important is I think the election has hopefully at least disrupted what could have been a very hard Brexit. The fact that we have got a toehold back in Scotland is amazing. The fact that we have more than just one MP in Scotland. Ian Murray was a sole voice there. I spoke to Ian, I said, what is the best thing now about having 7 colleagues? And he said, Secret Santa is going to be a lot better this year. And of course, we have more women. But as we know, second place is not good enough. We want to win, and we have got to win. And if there is another snap general election, we have got a shot at the title. So, I'm going to ask each of our panellists to speak for 5 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So, Caroline Flint, could I ask you to start?
Oh,
over
there. Well, hello, progress from the pyramid stage here at the TUC. Diane and myself will be at the silent disco DJ by Aisha shortly. In the proceedings, and it seems like there's a whole bevy of people down at Glasgow today, alongside Jeremy. There's probably Tom Watson still in that silent disco from last year, and I woke up to hear that Ed Balls and Yvette Cooper were there as well, and no doubt Chuka is alongside them. So good luck to them. As I said to Diane before we started, some of us did that sort of thing actually when we were young, but there we go. Look. It has been a really interesting election. And I think it's fair to say at the outset, when Theresa May announced that she was going to have the election she wasn't going to have, I think everyone from the safest Labour seat right up to the leader's office didn't expect us to have the outcome that we arrived at. And the Tories clearly thought that too. May stumbled, she hid away. Jeremy's ratings improved, and only yesterday we see that his ratings have improved again. And Labour did gain tremendous support, undoubtedly, amongst middle class and young voters. By gaining seats, Labour exceeded expectations. So I think we all have to acknowledge and admit that the election went far better than expected, and credit where credit's due. And there'll be a lot of discussion about that, not just today, but in the weeks and months ahead. In that sense, Labour did win the campaign. It was in part because the Tories ran a disastrous campaign. They ran only half a campaign, just 2 issues, Brexit Corbyn, with no positive offer for how life could improve. Their social care policy sank their manifesto. Theresa May avoided the voters, and she was shockingly bad in the campaign. Janice Turner described her as a broken pull-string doll who can't even utter her 5 pre-programmed phrases. And the Tories clearly didn't deserve to win. Theresa May thought Brexit would work for her, and it could have. In the end, despite beating Labour 3-1 among Leave voters, it was the Remain voters whose votes counted more. Overwhelmingly, they voted tactically to defeat the Tories, and mainly Labour benefited. Commentators called it the revenge of the Remainers, and that appears right. But we should not forget that some of the hardest fought campaigns were Labour MPs facing an onslaught in Leave voting seats as UKIP vacated the stage and endorsed the Tories. I was one of them. We felt like Labour's Praetorian Guard, or perhaps the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, except we lived to tell the tale. These MPs held the line against a huge national Tory spending campaign eating into their working class vote. Let's not forget, we lost Mansfield and Stoke South. We held Ashfield by only 441 votes, Bishop Auckland by only 502. The Tory vote in Rother Valley and Don Valley went up by 9,000. Stoke North up 8,400. Bolsover up by 8,000, and we didn't win back Copeland or Sherwood. In the circumstances, it was pretty amazing that more MPs in Leave seats did not lose. In part, this explains the 3% increase in turnout. Simply, there were more seats with real contests and parties driving up that turnout. To win next time, we need to know why we lost. We lost because the Tories racked up a record 13.6 million votes, 2.3 million more than in 2015. The Tories gained working class support, Labour lost it. The Tories had a 17% lead among people with no qualifications and a 7% lead amongst those with education lower than degree level. The Tories scored their highest vote amongst C2, DE voters since their victory in 1979, cutting Labour's lead amongst these working class voters to just 4%. And the Tories won a crushing victory among older voters, despite their best efforts to alienate them. As Tory MP Nigel Evans said, the only thing missing from the manifesto was compulsory euthanasia for the over 70s. Surprisingly, the Tory lead among pensioners was a massive 36%. Now, the votes of young people are to be welcomed, undoubtedly. One activist said to me after our count, "The young are always with us and the old die off, so things can only improve." I had to point out that Labour won a huge majority of young voters in 1983, and that same cohort voted overwhelmingly Tory in 2017. Older voters are growing in numbers and living longer. London has the youngest population in the country, an average age of 34. In contrast, many towns have an ageing population, nearer 50 than 30. So where do we go? With a new electoral map, how does Labour hold and extend this new coalition of voters? Are we now just the party of all liberal-minded progressives like the US Democrats, or are we still a party that is rooted in the British caste system? I say we must remain the representative voice of the working class. And given our strengths among BAME voters in our major cities, this means in our industrial towns and small town Britain being the champions of white working class voters too. Many of our towns and former industrial communities in the North, Wales and Scotland are not very diverse or cosmopolitan, but Labour has always been their voice. The Tories have made huge inroads into that base of voters, and we've got to rebuild our support there. To win older voters and to win back those working class voters, We must have a strong and robust stance on crime, defence, terrorism and on immigration. It is not simply enough to want more community police, although of course we do want that. We must be firm on managing migration, and we need to ask ourselves, why doesn't Britain have the workforce we need? It is not a success to recruit from abroad simply because you don't train enough of your own people. It is a disgrace that we don't train more nurses when applicants exceed training places and bursaries are cut. And finally, we need to be straight with people on Brexit. We know May called the election on the lie that the opposition, particularly Labour, would block Brexit. Only 114 MPs had voted not to trigger Article 50. And Jeremy said at the outset of the election, the issue of leaving Europe was settled. Now, May has lost a majority and we can't change tack or try to ensure that anything less than full membership of the single market and customs union is a hard Brexit. Those who aim to keep us in the single market know full well that this is EU membership in all but name. Now, I promised to work for the best deal for jobs in Doncaster, to protect workers' rights, to end free movement as we know it, and no second referendum. That is Labour's position too. And we can't spend the next 18 months looking like we're just scoring points to vote down every one of the Tories' EU bills. I think if we do that, we will look like liars. Instead, we can see how we constructively engaged, how we can look at the ways in which this country can succeed, that we're not just going to talk about Britain failing all the time and keep predicting disaster, that we can rebuild Britain with new ideas, and we have the opportunity to think outside of the box too. We've got to work harder together to own the good ideas wherever we can. We have to leave the trench warfare of the referendum behind and bring voters together, whether they voted, leave or remain. I think if we do that, that's part of the way forward to win the next election. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. She set the tone as coming up to the podium and talking. Now we all have to do the beauty walk up here. Look, in this election, we had, and this session is actually about how we beat the Tories. And right now, we have got one absolutely key ally in beating the Tories, and that's Theresa May. Theresa May went up and down the country in this election, reminding people why they hate Tories. That's what it felt like to be a candidate in this election, and anyone, and I'm looking out on a sea of people who actually came to Hove to help deliver victory there, we all knew this. We could see how she was turning off people who were open to an alternative. People who voted Labour before were open to the conversation with the Tories, but as soon as they saw Theresa May in action, they were frankly repelled. Now, the strategy that we have and we used in this election has got us halfway up the hill. But the problem is, the same strategy and more of the same is not going to get us right to the top. And we need to be right at the top of the hill. Because some of the growth in support came from the young, the well-educated, the professional, the Remain areas of Britain. But we've used pretty much that pool. We have fished it dry. Because if you're thinking that more than 70% of some groups in the younger cohorts of voters were voting for Labour, we can't have the next electoral strategy relying on more growth in those same areas. We have, in other words, got to broaden our appeal. Now, we need to broaden our appeal for two reasons. Firstly, because there's not much further to go in some of the strategy that got us here where we are today in this election. But secondly, we've got to broaden our appeal because it's the right thing to do. Because the people who need Labour the most weren't voting for us in this election. And that, for people like me, is heartbreaking. I went into politics to follow the need and not the noise. I know where the need is. I know where the need is in my constituency, and I know where it is in the country. And the people who live in those areas are increasingly turning to the Tories. They are not turning to Labour. And that is something that profoundly worries me. Now, usually when we talk about broadening our appeal in Labour, that means how do we attract more Tories? We've got ourselves into the unique position now where we need to attract more Tories, but we also, bizarrely, need to attract more people who voted Labour in the last couple of elections. So we need to broaden the appeal in both ways, and that's going to be a really difficult challenge. And bear in mind what happened in the US election last year. There are 3,000 polling districts in America in a presidential election. Just over 2,200 of those polling districts came in for Donald Trump. Of those 3/4 of the polling districts that voted for Donald Trump, it represents 35% of American wealth. Think of the implications of that. The majority of people, the majority of the geographical area, voting for a president, but that majority being the minority of wealth. We all can visualize that. We all know what that means electorally. It means that the people who need the Democrats and the left and Labour the most are not turning to us for voice right now. We know that the same is happening here in the UK. It's a really similar phenomenon. So the exam question that we have, and the question we fundamentally have to answer going forward, is how do we give voice to those people by leading and not just following? And I think this is something that we are going to struggle with going forward, because these people who need voice the most are not turning to Labour for that voice at the moment. So I would say, just in the short few seconds that I have left, that what we've got to do to broaden our appeal is, in terms of our policy platform, we've got to do better with policy. And that means broadening it. So in 2 examples, in transport, in an area like Brighton and Hove and in cities and towns up and down the country, we can't just talk about who owns the railways, or at least if we are going to talk about that a lot, we've got to talk at least as much about the people who use buses to get to work, about people who use the road network to get to work, and people who are sole traders, who are semi-skilled workers, who drive vans and can't afford to park in places like Brighton and Hove in London. These are the things that come up from the areas we need to represent, and we're losing support time and time and time again, and they are frankly furious about the issue of us spending 95% of every breath we breathe on transport being about who owns the rail when they haven't taken a rail journey for decades. But yet transport is a profoundly important issue for them. We did extend our appeal, and people like me have to realise that people who leave university with debt are viscerally angry about it and upset, and they are looking for solutions to their debt problem. We have to accept that, and I have to accept that Jeremy appealed to that, and some of our policies on it were fantastically popular. But we also are the Labour Party. That means we're a workers' party, not just a leftist party, and it means that if we're talking about issues like debt for university students, we've got to talk at least as much about students in sixth form colleges and further education. And we've got to talk at least as much as that for young people who are in vocational pathways into work. And we have to talk at least as much as that, or we have to talk as more than all of that added together about young people who fall off a cliff and have no secure pathway into education or into work. Because we're a Labour Party, we are a workers' party. We cannot just talk about education in terms of those who go to university and not everyone else who often doesn't, but has fantastic pathways into an incredibly rewarding life. And the Tories right now are staring into the abyss. But the key thing is that they know they're staring into the abyss and they are acting upon it. The next election will not be an election from the Tories which focuses on Jeremy's personality. It will not be an election which is led by an attack on Jeremy. The next election by the Tories will be one which is about the economy and is about policy. That is why the heavy lifting that we have to do as a party now is about that policy, because we are clearly not there yet. The only way we are going to beat the Tories is if we have a more credible story on the economy, we have a raft of policy platforms that isn't just about policing, it's about crime, that we are talking about the lived experience of the vast majority of people who live in this country, from professionals right through to skilled and semi-skilled workers. And that means having a front bench that can go out there and absolutely earn that trust and talk with erudition, experience and gravitas about the issues that most people experience in their lives. And now it's over to Diane Abbott.
Good morning. Let me try again. Good morning. Good morning. It's a great and unlooked-for pleasure to address the Progress Annual Conference, but we live in marvellous times. As Richard said, opposition is no substitute for government. And if you represent an area like Hackney, you know that very well. Over the decades, I saw how a Labour government, under a leadership which I didn't always agree with on every single thing, but a Labour government transformed the lives of my constituents, transformed the infrastructure, whether it's the housing, the NHS, transport, but also made a huge difference to the life chances of my young people in Hackney. So, you know, some people say sometimes, oh, the left isn't interested in winning. Let me tell you, the Member of Parliament for Hackney is always interested in winning because my young people's life chances depend on it. I have to say that the Parliamentary Labour Party, before we went into the general election, were a very distraught set of people. They believed that Jeremy was leading us to annihilation. They believed, most of them, that nobody with a majority under 5,000 had a chance of coming back. And it was very sad in those final days and hours. But, as we now know, we won 40% of the vote, which nobody anticipated. We won seats like Kensington and Canterbury, and actually, I'm one of the few people that did say it, we narrowed the polling, and Jeremy has now overtaken Theresa May in the polls, and I was one of the few people that believed that and said it. And I was very struck that the first day back in Parliament, on the Tory side, they were the ones that looked distraught, unhappy, divided. But the Parliamentary Labour Party, as Jeremy came into the chamber, gave him a standing ovation. And I want to believe that we can build on that moment of unity and go forward to defeat this government, because I believe, and Peter may not agree, but I believe that if there is a general election in the next 18 months, Labour is closer to winning that general election than it's been since 2010. In terms of what we have to do, though, you've heard from my colleagues what they think. Let me just raise a couple of things. First of all, this is a packed event, but it doesn't look like London. And I have been clear all my career about the importance of building a Labour Party which reflects the people it seeks to get to vote for it and reflects the people that vote for it. We should not take the votes of black and minority ethnic communities for granted. And we should aim to build a party which at every level, whether it's at a local level, whether it's a level of organisations like Progress, whether it's a borough council level, that reflects the people that vote for us. This is very important. There's sometimes a tendency in the Labour Party to take the BAME vote for granted, but the Tories understand the significance of it. And not only will they be going for the economy in the next general election, and I believe Peter is right about that, they'll also be seeking to pick off elements of our BAME support, and we shouldn't take it for granted. I think that will be a stronger party and a more robust party if we abandon the community leader type of engagement with BAME communities and build a genuine level of engagement. And we need to remember that seats like Croydon Central, seats like Finchley, there are a lot of issues, but actually those outer London seats, they're only in play because of the BAME vote, people that have moved there in order to get affordable housing. The other thing I want to talk about is about new members. Now, I know within Progress there's a certain amount of scepticism about new members, but I think it's really important that at a local level, a big attempt is made to weave new members into the warp and weft of the party. I was out in the key London marginals, and I have to tell you, new members, momentum members, flooded those marginals and helped to deliver the result. So, yes, people can be partisan, but there are literally thousands of people who've genuinely got involved in the party for the first time around this general election, and it's so important to weave them into the party. The other thing I would say, which I think was important and will be important going forward, is our manifesto. Now, I don't think our manifesto is in no need of any refinement. I thought Peter made good points about transport. And on the question of university, actually, the thing that upset my young people in Hackney more than anything else wasn't tuition fees at all. It was the end to the educational maintenance allowance, because far more of them were reliant on that than were actually going to uni. Fortunately, we actually, in the manifesto, said we were going to bring it back. But I do take Peter's point. It's one thing to talk about university students. We also need to talk about training, young people that go to college, young people in further education. But the point about our manifesto is it got an unprecedented response. This was my 8th general election. I have never had a general election where people came up to me in the street and said, we really like your manifesto. And I shouldn't discount that. You shouldn't discount that just because some elements of it you didn't like. It appealed to people because it was clear. It didn't attempt to triangulate. It offered people hope. It offered people a difference. I believe that the manifesto provides the basis to unite and go forward. And on the issue of immigration, we're going to have to debate that. The view of the leadership is that we do indeed need fair rules and reasonable management of migration. But I have always resisted the view that the only thing we need to do to win back seats in post-industrial Britain is to move right on immigration. I've always resisted it. I will continue to resist it, partly because I think, and I say this with some timidity as a London Member of Parliament, that what's happened to us in post-industrial Britain is far more complex than just moving right on immigration. But also, I think that some of the thinking and ideas about immigration makes no economic sense, makes no moral sense, and doesn't sit with the values of the Labour Party. But of course, once we leave a single market, freedom of movement falls, and we'll have to have an immigration policy. In closing, because I can see the chair looking at me, let me just say one last thing. We will all have seen the horrible events in Grenfell House, 23-storey tower block, where I think in the end we'll find hundreds of people were burnt to death. I was there this week talking to some of the survivors, and I know that part of London because some of the older people in the audience will remember that North Kensington, once upon a time, was one of the hubs of the West Indian community. And let me say this, Grenfell House is not just an accident. Grenfell House is not just an unfortunate incident which could not have been foreseen. That conflagration in Grenfell House, those hundreds of people that died, is a direct consequence of Tory attitudes to social housing. It's not just the Tories think people in social housing are second-class citizens, and as we see from Grenfell House, they're offering them second-class standards of safety. It's a direct consequence of that, a direct consequence of outsourcing, which is something we need to think about, and a direct consequence of deregulation. And I believe in Doncaster, in Hackney, in Hove, in Glasgow, these are issues that we can unite behind as a party and go on to victory. Thank you.
Good morning. I have the disadvantage that I am the only speaker on this panel who's unelected, and I have the advantage that I have no wish to be elected. First of all, let me say I agree with Diane on 4 points. Firstly, I think Labour could very well win a general election if one is held in the next year or 18 months. Secondly, I agree with her on immigration. Thirdly, obviously, on Grenfell Tower, I think it was Frederick Engel, who about 150, 170 years ago coined the term social murder to describe people who die as a direct consequence of the neglect of people with power and money. And I think we've seen social murder. And fourthly, I agree with her that one of the things that's helped Labour win many seats was its manifesto. Here is where I depart. I think the manifesto was full of snake oil. It was plausible snake oil, popular snake oil, passionately promoted snake oil, but still snake oil. In my 5 minutes, I'll just pick up 3 points very briefly. Firstly, the tax and spend proposals were simply economically illiterate. As the IFS and others have said, Labour's plans would cost far more than the party said. The taxes it would raise far less than the party said. And the idea that only the top 5% would be affected is ridiculous, because the impact of Labour's measures on corporate taxation and finances would affect jobs, wages, prices and pensions for the great majority of people. Secondly, the Labour manifesto in its section on business simply displayed no understanding whatsoever of how private sector wealth is created. It had nothing to say about red tape, about competition policy, about investment tax relief, about management buyouts, about stock market reforms, about long-term management and shareholder incentives. Capitalism needs to be reformed, clearly. But here's the problem. Until relatively recently, both Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell were opposed to capitalism. They said so. They were quite open about it. A year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago, they stopped saying that. But they haven't said, actually, the market is the right way to deliver the great majority of goods and services. And I don't know whether they still hold the view that they held for 30 or 40 years and are concealing it, or whether they've changed their view. If they change their view, then let us hear them say, we want a big, prosperous, private, competitive market sector. And if that's what they really think, then not only should they say it, but they should demonstrate some understanding of how that system works. Thirdly, policy on Brexit. Now, I reminded myself this morning of what the manifesto said. What the manifesto says is we want all the benefits of the single market and the customs union. We want all the rights of EU citizens and of British citizens elsewhere to be maintained. We want no change in the status of the border in Ireland. We want no change in the status of Gibraltar. We want to carry on with the same cooperation with Europe on climate change, refugees, counter-terrorism and structural funding. And we want to remain part of Horizon 2000, Euratom, the European Medicines Agency, Erasmus, Eurojustice and Europol. Now, Richard asked us to be generous as well as open. So I'm going to be generous. I'm going to offer the party a policy. There is one way to achieve these things. And there is only one way to achieve these things, and that is to say we're not going to leave the European Union. Now, I do understand the proposition and the difficulty that Caroline faces in terms of us having had a referendum. But let me say this, as it were, on behalf of Jeremy Corbyn. I look at Jeremy's records over the decades, his battles on race and gender equality, on apartheid, on overseas aid, on anti-terror legislation, Nicaragua, Palestine, the list can go on. And I think I'm not doing Jeremy an injustice when I said on each of these occasions he argued from a point of principle and not on democratic consent. He believed these causes were just. So if you follow my logic, and if he follows my logic, it says the only way to achieve the things we want to achieve in this continent of ours is, in principle, to stay in the European Union, then let the party leadership be as principled on this issue as it has been over the last 30 years on all these other progressive issues. I think I've caused enough offence, I'll stop.
Excellent. Right, we now have a bit of time for questions. So can I open the floor to questions? And if you could say your name and sort of who you are. Okay, do we have a roving mic? Yeah, we have. Okay, I'm going to start with the gentleman here at the front. Yep, in the T-shirt.
Hi, my name is that on? Yeah, my name is Dan Mayhew. I'm from Grantham and Stanford Constituency, but I'm also a scientist for Labour, exec member. And I just wanted to point out the policy around Horizon 2020 and Euratom. What you actually are stating is factually incorrect. You can be a member, an associate member of both of those bits without being a member of the European Union. I wrote that part. I was part of the policy that wrote that bit. It's a fact. You can be. There are stuff like Switzerland is a member. There are several other associate members. You can be a member outside the European Union.
Yes, but the complete list. My point was there's a complete agenda which says we want to keep all these things, and the only way to fulfill that complete agenda is to stay in the EU. The idea that we can have all these things, I'm sure we can have a few of them, the only way to have all of these things is to stay in the EU. The idea that, the choice we will face in a year's time as a country and as a party is we either have a hard Brexit or we stay in the EU. The idea that there is a choice that the other 27 member states will agree to, that's halfway between those two, is moonshine. So let us address that dilemma now rather than pretend we can evade that choice.
Can I just want to pick up on that and just come back to sort of Caroline and Peter and Diane, because obviously you're the people that are in Parliament now. What is your view on just basically ignoring the will of the people and saying, you know what, we're not doing this?
I think it's bollocks. And I'll tell you why. This idea that somehow, those of us who, whether we are in Leave or Remain seats, do accept the fact that there was a referendum and it made the decision it did, I just have to say, if Remain had won the referendum and it had been turned around the other way, would they have been saying that actually the Leave voters could overturn it within 2 years and run the sort of campaign that some people who supported Remain are doing? I actually think, when I think about those of us who were campaigning for Remain in predominantly Leave seats, we were the champions, we took it on the chin, we were fighting, and to be honest, the Remain campaign nationally let us down because it was too metropolitan, it was too middle class.
Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't. It was making all of the mistakes that we have made when we could have made a difference to how the European Union was seen. Yeah. And that's just a fact. And the idea that we continue to run a sort of trench warfare, that's what it's been a bit like since last year. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working for a good outcome. But most of the voters haven't got a clue what this hard Brexit, soft Brexit means. It's meaningless to them. Many voters, including many Remain voters, and that's what the polling shows as well, thinks the government should get on with it. And what we've got to do is constructively engage, force Theresa May to talk to the other party leaders, and make sure we defend the issues that are important. And one thing we should say is the Great Repeal Bill is the wrong name for it. It's the Great Adoption Bill it should be.
Yeah, okay. We could just go through quickly, so we can just get your... And then...
No, I led the Remain campaign for the South East of England. I was the only Labour MP in the South East of England at the time. So there wasn't a very long list of applicants for the job, but I put my heart and soul into it in a way that, frankly, our party overall didn't, and the Remain campaign didn't really, get right down to where it's needed to be. But from the very start of that referendum campaign, I was never in any doubt, Caroline, that the people who voted Leave and campaigned for Leave, if the country had voted Remain, they would have carried on campaigning for Leave. Yeah. Because we live in a democracy, and we're elected to do what we believe is in the best interests of our community and our country. We are living in really constitutionally difficult times when it comes to Brexit, because we've had a referendum that doesn't have a constitutional mandate and a general election that does. Now, the primary reason for this election, we were told by the Prime Minister, was to give her a strong mandate for Brexit, and the country said no. So we can't just ignore these issues, because we now live in a world where the country has demanded a rethink and has refused to give her the mandate that she asks for. And this comes back to one very simple thing for me. And this is updated very regularly, because each week we get more evidence to support or update the question we have to ask ourselves. But the question we ask ourselves this week, in the week where the Governor of the Bank of England said in a speech that categorically people and wages will be lower after Brexit. Our nation will be poorer after Brexit. The Governor of the Bank of England said that this week. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what benefit will Brexit bring that counterweighs and counterbalances the fact we're going to be poorer? I cannot see that answer.
Straight after the referendum.
Briefly, I represent one of the most heavily Remain constituencies in the country. Hackney North and Stoke Newington, I think, voted 75% for Remain, as does Jeremy, as does Emily Thornberry. So you can imagine we discuss this over and over again. But in the end, you could not withstand the argument that with a referendum, with actually quite a high turnout and quite an emphatic result, we could not just turn our face away from that referendum and say, we here in London know better. We chose to take the democratic path. But at this point now, we have to fight for the best possible Brexit. We have to fight a Tory Brexit.
Just very quick, because I'm conscious we have to go and get some questions.
But Diane and Caroline's point, I accept, but then the manifesto was utterly dishonest in pretending that all these horrible things of Brexit won't happen. They will happen. So if you say, yes, we've got to respect the public's verdict, and I understand that argument, then be honest in the manifesto about the damage it's going to do our country.
Yeah, but okay, all right, okay, so I suppose just looping back, one of the whole things is, how do we show that we can listen to people across the whole of the country and not just people in London as well? So that is as big. Right, I'm conscious we have spent quite a lot of time talking about Brexit. So if I could have some questions about winning and how we beat the Tories, that would be great. Now, I am going to gentleman at the front here. Yeah.
Thank you. Liam Martin, name from Ilford North CLP, and first of all, Diane, it's great to see you back in Parliament and back in good health as well. I want to talk about the big issue of tax and spending, because I think one lesson that should be taken from the Tory so-called dementia tax in the general election is not so much that they were morally wrong to do it, but it goes against why people have always voted Tory, which is that why should the state take what I have worked so hard and so long in my life to earn? So when the country is still running quite a big deficit, and yet public services are under threat, and given what the Labour Party have presented in a manifesto to increase spending and taxes, how do you envisage reconciling that?
Okay, I'm going to actually take questions in the clumps of 3 just to get through as many as possible. Gentleman at the back in the white t-shirt. Yeah. Have we got any women that can ask some questions as well? That'd be quite nice. Right, yeah.
Hello.
Following on from Peter Kellner.
What's your name? Where are you from?
Alex from Hackney.
Hi.
Following on from Peter Kellner's point about whether the leadership believe, well, they're against capitalism or whether they think that it should be reformed, could I ask Diane whether she believes the Labour Party is a socialist party or a democratic socialist party?
Okay. And we'll take one more. I'm keen to get... Oh, yes. Lady in the black, blonde hair, thank you.
There's one here as well.
Oh, right.
It's Judy Brimble from Exeter CLP. What I'd like to ask is who is going to analyse how we're going to win? Because we can rest assured the Tories will be analysing why they didn't do as well as they expected. What I'm worried about is that we're too busy cheering Corbyn and the fantastic manifesto and not analysing how we can win next time.
Okay, so... Diane, if I can come to you first, who's going to analyse are we a Socialist Party and tax and spend?
Well, on the question, are we a Socialist Party or a Democratic Socialist Party? We are, of course, a Democratic Socialist Party. And what is more, we are a party which has always been within itself a progressive alliance. So, you know, that's what it is.
Actually, can I just ask, what is your view about MPs being deselected?
Well,
because there's been a bit of Twitter chat on that. Well, and I mean, I thought your thing about unity was really good. Like, I think the optic of Jeremy having the standing ovation is very powerful. And as you, how do we keep that going and how do we stop the talk of deselection?
Well, I hope people in Hackney North won't deselect me to begin with. No, I mean, obviously, you can't cut across local parties and their own internal workings. But Jeremy has never called for deselections on the basis that people are his political opponents. He does not support that, but we cannot cut across what happens within local parties. On the question of tax and spend, I think it's really important that we opened up the question of taxation in the manifesto. I really do. We need to have an open debate about what we do about taxation as a social democratic party. On the question of analysis, of course people are analysing it. Yes, it's good to cheer the leader and so on, but people in the leader's office, people in think tanks, pollsters, and it is actually quite a complicated picture. You've got seats side by side, like the two Reading seats, for instance. One fell to us, the other the Tories held, and we do need to examine why that was. So, of course, it goes without saying, we're going to analyse the result.
Peter.
Which one?
Which one? Peter Kellner. Go to Peter Kellner. Particularly on the analysis, yeah.
I get that. The point I make briefly is this, that Labour has, and I agree with Peter Kyle's analysis, by the way, about we've got about as far as we can with what is turned out to be, I don't think it was intended to be, it's turned out to be a sort of rainbow strategy. You bring together sort of students, ethnic minorities, people working in the public sector, people living in social housing, and make a sort of specific set of offers. And my favourite sort of pair of facts in this election, the two constituencies with the highest vote, highest numerical vote, were Knowsley and Bristol West. Knowsley, full of public sector workers, social housing, people working age living on benefit. Bristol West, a Lib Dem seat till 2015, full of students, professionals, the exam-passing classes. You know, you could not imagine two constituencies that are demographically or socially or educationally or financially more apart. I think we need to go back to being what I'm sure Diane and indeed Peter and Caroline have always wanted us to be, but we weren't quite this time, a whole nation party. In other words, we need to pivot as Bill Clinton pivoted the Democrats 25 years ago and Tony Blair pivoted Labour in the mid-90s from being a party sweeping up a set of important but specific sectional interests into being a party that has a big offer for the whole country. Yeah. And I think that can be done, but I think it has to be done.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything, or do you want to, John?
Well, I'll just, to Julie's point, actually, absolutely, Julie, we need to take an opportunity to analyse all this. And, you know, nobody has a monopoly on truth. none of us on this platform know what's happened in our party, and is that after the 2010 defeat, which was a massive defeat, we never really analysed what went wrong then, because we went straight into a leadership contest. In 2015, Ed left very rapidly, and we were then in the middle of another contest, and despite Margaret Beckett's inquiry, I think it was, to be honest, I'm not blaming her, it was impossible to really have that running alongside a leadership contest. So I think, you know, if there's anything in, you know, what we can do now, given we're not going to have a leadership contest, can we find a way to explore better how we can improve? Because there is no doubt about it, looking at the figures, and Stephen Bush wrote a very interesting article about this, compared to where we were in 2015, a 3.5% swing I think would give us a minority government. So actually that's a far better place than when we were in 2015. So I hope Jeremy, and he has said this, is going to open up to have the conversation we need to have to be that one nation party.
Yeah, Julie, I said in my remarks earlier that I thought the Tories were staring into the abyss and acting. I think the position we find ourselves in is because we lost the election, we are by definition in the abyss, but we seem to be partying like it's 1999. And what worries me is that will paralyse our party when it comes to having a cold, hard look about how we got those extra 30-odd seats and what it's going to take to get the next 50 that we need to get. And it's sometimes hard in seats where you survive and thrive to have that, because it's to have that discussion and be honest about, you know, your experiences, because it sounds like you're gloating or blowing smoke up your own backside. But the thing I'm proud, and I can say this because so many people I can look out on here came down to Hove and helped so hard to achieve what we did, was that we had a pretty amazing progressive alliance down there when it came to voting, because the Greens didn't stand down in Hove. They ran the leader of the Green group on council with a very high profile, who lost his deposit. We had UKIP, who did stand down in Hove to favour the Tories, and they had 5,500, 6,000 votes in Hove. The Tory vote went down 2,000. And we could have only got from a majority of 1,200 to 19,000 had 5 or 6 or more thousand Tories decided to vote Labour this time. Now that is a progressive alliance I'm pretty proud of.
Okay.
And you do it very simply by showing that you as an individual and as a party, your values and principles exist to serve others. That process of proving that starts with listening to local priorities and by finishing it, by acting on them. Yes. And it really is that simple.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Right, another round of questions. I have the gentleman over there in the blue jacket. I can't see any. Are there any? Sorry, I think the gentleman over there first, and then lady over here at the front afterwards. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jim. I'm from Aberconway in North Wales, a place where we cut the Tory majority from 4,000 to 600.
Yay.
I just want two things from you, yeah? I don't want us falling out. I want unity, yeah? And I want simple messages. Yeah. The success of the manifesto came from having simple messages. The success in '97 came from having simple messages that we can sell on the doorstep. So I just want those two things.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Jim, lady at the front.
Thank you very much. My name's Angie McAvoy from Enfield Southgate, Labour Gain. Thank you. The title of this is How Do We Bring This Tory Government to an End? Can I have agreement from everyone on the panel that when we come to conference, that is what we are focusing on this year? And that how do we stop internal politics overshadowing what obviously should be our priority, and as a call for unity, I suppose.
Fantastic. Great. I'm just going to actually group those together because I think they sit quite well together. And just picking up on Jim's point, I mean, Peter has been, admiring of some of the manifesto, but critical about some of the does it add up, and that's absolutely fair enough. But one of the things, having worked on many manifestos in the Labour Party over the years, one of the things I do agree with Jim, that there was a clarity to it. And I think that is something that a lot of sort of Labour members and activists have been crying out for a long time. With our last couple of manifestos, nobody could really tell you what the headline policy. Caroline had a fantastic massive ice cube that she took round the country, and other than that, we had a confusing policy on the mansion tax. So I think there is something in that. So and unity, I think unity is incredibly important. I think your messages, and actually I think a lot of the people that we need to reach out saw what the Labour Party could do in 6 weeks by coming together, and were genuinely quite excited by that. So is it possible to continue that spirit? I'm going to come to Peter first.
This Peter.
Yes,
stand down,
Peter,
stand
Peter.
down. Well, I mean, I got into a bit of trouble the last Progress conference for saying quite explicitly that the way to unite, to earn unity in the party is that to bring us together and around a winning vision for Britain. And I will unite around a winning vision for Britain and nothing else. I'm not interested in personality politics. So we know that there were certainly aspects of that last manifesto that really excited people. It took the party into groups of people that we'd never been or hadn't been there for a very long time. We do need to learn from that. But if we are urged to be loyal to an individual rather than the winning vision for Britain, well, I'm just not interested in it, because I don't think the public are interested in it. And we have to be really honest about this and have this upfront, honest debate, because we spoke in the 5-6 weeks of the campaign to 80% of the people who live in Hove and Portslade. And Jeremy was a huge issue on the doorsteps, not one that we had to elicit and drag out of people. They volunteered at the second they opened the door and saw the Labour badge. And a lot of people were very concerned. Now, you heard this thing, this is why this is relevant to unity. You heard quite a lot of the same people saying in the same sentence, I don't like Jeremy, I wish we had another leader, can you get rid of him? And also, will the Labour Party stop squabbling? And you hear the same thing in the same sentence. People are concerned about squabbling and backbiting and all the rest of it. They are concerned, and they aspire to a party, and they want a party which is unified. But they also want a party which is well-led, and that a leader that really puts effort into unity and leads towards unity. And there are a lot of things which you can only achieve through fighting. You use the language of battling and fighting a lot in politics, because you don't achieve policy changes, you don't achieve electoral success without a fight. And that's why we have to really bear that in mind and not be scared of fighting for the things we really believe in. But also we have to balance that with the fact that the public do want a period of stability. The Tories know it at the moment. The Tories have no love for their leader right now. But they are unifying behind her because they know how.
I think with a massive set of daggers, quite honestly.
No, it's true. But unity is something which is earned as well as given.
Do you think that Jeremy has earned the right to have a bit of unity? Because even though, as you're right, well, it's not party like it's 1997, but coming back with an increased PLP is surely a good thing.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Jeremy has absolutely earned the right to be listened to, and certainly earned the right for people like me to be engaged with. I mean, I feel like I did our bit for the party this time.
Absolutely.
And I did what was asked of me, and every person that came out on the doorsteps and fought for a Labour victory did likewise. So Jeremy has delivered steps forward towards defeating the elections. But let's be really clear about this. I had surgeries in the last few days, and I've had people who are being harassed and victimised by the PIP system. I've had disabled people who are facing being turfed out of their accommodation because there's no money for it anymore. All of the problems we fought for victory in this election still exist because we lost.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be romantic about.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think so.
So Jeremy has earned the right to be listened to now, and he has earned the right for me to listen. But we need to make sure we are demonstrably taking steps forward.
And Caroline,
and he can count on me to help him on that journey, incidentally, if he's up for listening.
Well, on that, what do you think he needs to do to reach out to and kind of create some of this unity that clearly everybody wants to see?
Well, I think part of it is about, looking beyond, clear, massive support he's got amongst certain sections of the people who voted for us to tackle some of the areas where we're not appealing. And as I outlined earlier, the sort of things that came up on the doorstep were concerns about his approach on policing, security and defence. And actually what was very interesting about Jeremy since he's been leader, and I know maybe some of his supporters may not like to acknowledge this, is that actually Jeremy has, if you like, trimmed his sail somewhat from where some people think he is on some of the policy areas. So he was quite clear when the police in London basically shot those people attacking people at the bridge. He was quite clear about, after his statement after that he absolutely understood and thought that was the right thing to do. Now, given that he's been challenged, and the Tories tried to do this during the general election campaign, and because of other issues it didn't work in the way they thought it would, and they won't be able to do that again, I don't think, on issues around police being able to shoot to kill in certain circumstances, he unequivocally basically recognised that the police had no option but to do that. And I think that in itself probably did more among a number of people to say he's actually thinking seriously about some of those issues. And I think that's going to be important. And he has to show that he's willing to be open to that. And maybe some of his supporters also have to be open to recognise that he recognises wherever you... The whole thing about left and right in politics, he has shown in the last few years that he's prepared to compromise and actually somewhat trim some of the policies maybe some of his people think he's ardently supporting, but he actually isn't.
And just on a sort of practical thing, if his office reached out to the two of you to come and have conversations about some of these things, would you be willing to engage?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've said that to him already. I've been at a few events where he's been at them. I obviously have worked with the front bench on issues around tax transparency in the last couple of years, and on energy policy as well. I've worked very closely with people like Alan and others. And if there's other areas that I can offer some thoughts on, I'm happy to do that. But we have to be honest and we have to be straight. And can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, quickly.
We cannot assume that the election the Tories ran this time is going to be the same.
No, of course.
We can't totally have a...
Yeah.
Okay, so we haven't got a crystal ball and events happen, but there ain't no way they're going to allow what happened in the last 8 weeks to happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
can I say something about unity?
Yeah, I just wanted Diane to come in quickly, just in terms of, because obviously, Diane, what's your kind of, response to all of that? And is the door open? Will the leadership be reaching out to people like Caroline and Peter? And can we come together in a kumbaya-style manner as we head into conference?
People forget that when Jeremy won the first leadership election, he did actually try to build a shadow cabinet which was very broad. On one hand, you had Lord Faulkner, the original Blairite, Tony Blair's flatmate. On the other hand, you had people that were more naturally associated with the left. So he did try to build a broad shadow cabinet, but then, I hate to be contentious, but then you had the coup. And in response to Peter Kyle talking about we shouldn't be scared of having a fight, I don't think that the party at the grassroots, still less our electorate, want to see us fighting as such. They want a debate, because I accept that the manifesto, which actually drawn up relatively quickly, is not perfect in every particular, and there needs to be a debate around transport. Some of the issues look different in different parts of the country, but just fighting is exactly what people don't want to see. And just another thing you said about, we're partying like it's 1999 and we're paralysed and we're not looking. Actually, within hours of understanding the results, we were identifying the 60 constituencies we need to win if we're going to win an election, say, this autumn, and each constituency actually will have a different narrative, different things that need to happen. So the idea that the leadership, whatever you think of it, paused to, party around this result and isn't thinking about winning what could be quite an imminent general election, I can reassure you that's not true.
Okay, well, that all feels very positive. And Peter?
Yeah, I think I'm one of the very few people here who was at the Bournemouth Party Conference in 1985 where Neil Kinnock took on militants. And in the months leading up to that, there were various people, to take one at random, Jeremy Corbyn, who said, let's not divide the party. Let's have unity. Let's not rock the boat. And I think most of us would say that Neil Kinnock did the right thing. It was divisive, but it was divisive for a purpose, to get the party into a better place. 15 years later, Tony Blair demanded party unity when people, let's take a name at random, Jeremy Corbyn, was rebelling frequently against Labour policies. And I think Jeremy was right to stand up for what he believed in and not to fall for unity for the sake of it. So I would say, yes, the next election, the party should be unified, but it should be unified round a rigorous manifesto that this one wasn't, that will be able to withstand the scrutiny next time that this one did not receive because nobody thought Labour would win. So unity, yes, but, and the but is a very big but.
Okay, so unity. I think we almost have unity. We've got unity, but a bit of fighting going on as well. That's so. Do we have time for? No, we. Listen, because we overran, we are going to have to cut it short. But what a fantastic, stimulating early discussion to get us going. Can we have a massive round of applause for all our fantastic panellists? Thank you very much.